Long as I got you, yeah, everything is gonna be alright. I know it will. Be alright. Oh, yeah.
Where them shoes at? Where them shoes at?
And that's a remix.
Exactly. Where them shoes at?
Welcome to the show, everybody.
What up? What up? What up?
Hosts. I'm Chuck. That is Zig. We want to welcome you all to another exciting episode of the Sabbath Morning Show. Where we will talk critical race theory. What is it?
Critical race theory.
Yep. We'll talk about, is America racist? I don't know. Some may say no. And of course, we'll dive into other topics. But before we get into all that, Zig, hit them off with prayer.
Oh, kind and gracious Heavenly Father, we ask that you just press closer to us, so that we might be able to see you, and through you see each other. Amen.
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 Happy Sabbath. Shabbat Shalom, Mr. Simmons.
Shabbat Shalom. Hey, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat.
Yes, sir. How was the week?
Oh, bro, it was rough, but I made it through. It was rough.
You made it through, so you can tell that you made it.
Yeah, this was my theme for the week.
Good.
Definitely. What about you, man?
Oh yeah, man. Definitely happy to get some rest. Happy to have made it through, survived another week. Overall, it was a good week. It had its moments where it was just like, it had its good moments, but my whole week, I can't say on the whole, was quite so bad. So.
Yo, I had some pretty good highlights though. I sent you some good deeds, man. There's some good people out there. Random kindness of strangers, those things exist. And so, I had a couple, I would say, highlights. Like, the week was pretty bad, but those moments definitely lifted me up in the moment, and just gave me like the fuel, like, hey, completely took my mind off of all the stress that I was dealing with. And so definitely grateful for the kindness of strangers. And then, it's just good feeling, man. Even now thinking about it, I'm like, the week was great. I had that moment, got me some Star Wars swag, and the week was good.
There you go, man. And speaking of kindness of strangers, let us not forget the Sumter family.
Absolutely.
They are definitely looking for the kindness of strangers in this time of need. We talked about it on the show a couple of times. And they are close. Not exactly there, but they are close to hitting their goal on GoFundMe. Please definitely go check it out. They are at 3,800 of the 45. So they're trying to.
Well, you know what? Today is Sabbath, man, and I know where my tithe is going today.
There you go. Help them hit that level. Ooh. And of course, you can donate as well on the Adventist website for their church. What church do they go to again? I don't remember.
That's the Conant Gardens Church.
Conant Gardens, that's right.
In Detroit, Michigan. Which, for you SDA folks out there, if you give through the SDA portal, they'll give you your receipt for your taxes.
There you go.
There you go.
Great way to smooth out a bad week. Like Eric was saying, he did something good, help smooth it out. This is your chance. If you had a bad week, go ahead and visit the website. Go check them out on GoFundMe and do something good.
Absolutely. The kindness of strangers, man, like that will definitely get you, when you're kind to a stranger, when a stranger's kind to you, it'll make a difference in your life.
Yes.
Encourage you all to do that. So, let us know in the comments if you had an opportunity this week to be kind to somebody, or if somebody was kind to you, share that blessing. And while you're at it, share, like,
and subscribe. And it's funny you talk about that. Maybe real quick on blessing the kindness of strangers. We a new woman started in our group. She's a new employee that I hired, and one of my other employees was having some type of bad day, and he came at me wrong as well. And it was interesting. Like, I was like, I'm gonna like lay into this dude later, like in my one-on-one with him. Like, we're gonna have some words. Like, you can't be acting like that. But before I ended up talking to this guy later that day, he was like, "Oh, Janaea, this new employee, she talked to me and she encouraged me, and she was like, it's not that bad, because there was a lot of project work, and she was like, we can do it together. I'll help you." And she brought like this such a positive spirit to him that he was just like, "Yeah, you're right. I don't have to be angry anymore."
And you felt bad about getting ready to go into it, did you? Like, man.
I felt a little bit bad because I was still upset about what he had said. But it's the kindness of strangers. Being kind can definitely make someone's day, and that's what God has asked us to do. And as we interact with people, we can definitely make a difference in their lives.
Amen. Well, we had our another good highlight. I did the prayer meeting this week, and I just grateful to God for like giving me the words. Like, the Lord knows. Listen, bro. When the pastor asked me to do it, I said yes, and I immediately started working on it.
There you go.
Then I lost my notes. So I had to. So I had to start over from scratch, and which kind of makes me. And what I ended up doing was nowhere near what I was planning on doing initially. And so, yeah, man, that was definitely a moment.
But you got through it, and we don't get through the show. What is the first topic on our notes? Thanks to our shout out to them for making the scripts.
Absolutely. We got some brother Tim Scott, man, in the news. We're gonna start with Tim Scott. I think he was a catalyst.
Tim
Scott. So if y'all don't know about Tim Scott, he is the only black senator in the United States government right now. Now,
history in more ways than one.
And so this brother, he's smart, he's intelligent, he has some humble upbringings, but he does, and he gets a lot of flack because he is a Republican. Another little known fun fact for you all: there have only been 11 black senators ever in the United States. Kamala Harris was one of them. Barack Obama was one of them. They kind of, they went on and moved on to bigger and better things. And now all we got is Tim Scott to hold it down. And Brother Scott had a couple words for us this week. Well, not this week.
A couple weeks back.
Yeah. A week and a half ago.
In case you missed it, we didn't get a chance to talk about it.
He had some words for us. Oh, goodness. What did he say?
Are you showing it, or am I pulling it up?
Do you got it up?
I can, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I started playing it in like an ad.
Nah, it's all good. We we had some issues with the producer just now. They're supposed to bring it up on the screen. We gotta do it ourselves. We don't look for new talents, maybe.
Right.
All right, we about to show it. Gotta.
Oh wait, I got it.
Boom.
I got it.
And it is just so you can see the context of what we're talking about and see the angst and why we got to mention our dear brother here.
Yeah, this guy. What did he say?
America is not a racist country. experienced the pain of discrimination. I know what it feels like to be pulled over for no reason, to be followed around the store while I'm shopping. I remember every morning at the kitchen table, my grandfather would open the newspaper and read it, I thought. But later I realized he had never learned to read it. He just wanted to set the right example. I've also experienced a different kind of intolerance. I get called Uncle Tom and the N-word by progressives, by liberals. Just last week, a national newspaper suggested my family's poverty was actually privilege because a relative owned land generations before my time. Believe me, I know firsthand our healing is not finished. In 2015, after the shooting of Walter Scott, I wrote a bill to fund body cameras. Last year, after the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, I built an even bigger police reform proposal.
Of it.
When America comes together,
So
we've made
this brother,
tremendous
his point was that America is not a racist country, right? I think at somewhere in there he talked about there's still healing that needs to be done.
Yes.
Which, if we still need to heal, is it still racist? Right? And so that's where I kind of was like, I wanted to hear what he had to say. I wanted to hear his point. But I feel like politicians, and a lot of people in general will say they will say America isn't racist. It's all in your head. You're just making it up. You're just playing the victim. And then we'll say, look at all the progress we've made.
All the progress we made.
Look at all the progress that we have made.
Yeah, it's interesting because he wasn't the only one to
nope, he wasn't. He wasn't.
Language of America's not a racist country. It was also our dear Vice President. Shout out to Kamala Harris. She also said America's not a racist country.
But she also talked about, look at all the progress we've made, and look, we have still a lot more work to do.
Right. And then it's like we said, it's a little mix of politicians and people trying to talk to all these different audiences to keep their vote and to keep their constituents happy. And it's not the truth. It's people sugarcoat and try to make things different. I understand maybe their sentiment of saying that not every American is racist. That is true.
Yes, absolutely.
But I think there's stuff within our American system that leans racist. I mean, let's be honest. Like, it's not leaning left or conservative or liberal; it just leans racist. Like,
yep. Which is interesting because we talked about Brother Gianno Caldwell, who's a Fox host contributor, and again, the conservative audience, the conservative group, they love this man. But as soon as he said justice was served in regards to George Floyd, all them same people was like, you just saying it because you black. And that was the nicest comment that he got.
Yeah. And it's real crazy out here. I like what you said, a pus-filled wound can't heal. And that's the thing, like there's so much involved in it. It's like, there's been great strides, to make progress. And this kind of moves into why we need to consider our true history, the question of America being racist. I mean, kind of, there's so many different views on that, right? Because they're like, oh, well, we did all these things. We we ended slavery. We did the civil rights movement. America's not racist. These are our facts to prove why it's not. It's like,
look at all the work we've done.
And it's true. There has been that work was needed. I mean, it's like we talk about a work that's a basic quality. Like, yes, we gave you a steering wheel. You're right. Your car needs a steering wheel. If you didn't have a steering wheel, you couldn't drive the car. And people use that basic quality to say, oh no, this is good enough. And it's like, no,
Yep.
that's just a basic quality of life. Like you shouldn't own people. Yes, I'm glad you stopped doing that because that's a basic quality.
It's almost like it's abusive. It's like an abusive relationship,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where the person who has been the abuser will say, will constantly do things. It might not be as aggressive or as egregious as it once was, lynchings, and you might not have that in town hall beatings, those kind of things. No, we don't do that anymore, right? And so, but I'm still doing these other things to make you feel bad. I'm still doing these other things to put you down. I'm still doing the psychological damage.
Mm-hmm.
I might not be doing the physical damage anymore, but the psychological damage is still there. Or even if the psychological damage is a little bit better, then the financial exploitation is still there. And if the financial exploitation isn't there, then the educational oppression is still there. So it's like, but and I'm supposed to then say, yeah, but I'm still afraid as the person who's being abused.
Right.
While you're saying, but I've changed.
Right. And and that's even with what Tim Scott's saying, for him, maybe his experience has improved. And that's fine that your experience has improved, but you can't also in the same breath say my experience is therefore everyone's experience.
And that's exactly what I was about to say.
And therefore America's not a racist country because I no longer experience these things. And I've done things. I mean, it's true. It's like we're saying, he's introduced those bills, but it's like, to me, that's even more contradictory. You introduced these bills because
why'd you do that?
Because
why would you do that? There's no racism. Why would you introduce these bills?
Right.
To combat what again?
Exactly.
To combat, what's that word? Systemic what?
Right. But
so it's like, yeah, man. And then another thing in his transcript,
it's racism. It's just bad policing. That's the line.
Yeah, that's it. We just got bad police, nothing else. Another thing he said in his speech was, original sin is never the end of the story. And as Christians, we do believe that, right? That sin is not the end of your story. Not in our souls and not from our nation. The real story is always redemption. And I thought it was really interesting that he said that, because in order for us to be redeemed, we have to do something.
Right.
There's a part that we have to do. And I just don't quite feel like the country has done that, like as a whole, right? So we know as Christians that in order to be redeemed, we have to accept our behavior and ask for forgiveness and depart from it, right? And shift our gaze towards Jesus.
Right.
And if we put that in the context of what his own words, right? Sin is not the end of the story. Yes, I agree with him. And then he goes on and said, not in our souls. I agree. And then not for our country. The real story is redemption. So it's kind of like, well, how has there been redemption? And I often think, like, in order to do that, like there would need to be like a confession, right? An actualization and to what was done wrong, and a pathway to make amends, and a commitment to not do it again.
And I think that's the kind of confusing part, because we're kind of in between some of those stages, right, where they've acknowledged that it was wrong. They've acknowledged, I'm talking collectively as a nation, like we have on the books, like you can't own slaves, but then in the same breath is like, but you can put them in jail and basically have almost slave slavery. So it's definitely this sense of the two sides of it. And I was thinking about how does kind of acknowledge that's true. I was thinking about the church, like how as we have a church, manage, this is our church is racist, And that's a good question for you in the audience to ponder. Do you think that our churches are racist? There's a lot of
that's what
views on that. Some people will say no, absolutely not. And then other people just in the same breath will say yes, absolutely yes.
absolutely. And I mean, part of it is just that, and even if it isn't inherently racist, there are a lot of racist tropes and a lot of racist practices that have been brought into the church. Everyone, one of those most used quotes is, America is most segregated on Sunday.
Yeah.
And then it shows, I try to, and I think we both do, like we try to like diversify kind of what information we're taking in, and even some of the, I'll say, neutral Christian media that I will listen to stings.
Mm.
And you'd be like, woo. And I was like, I don't think he understands what he's saying. Because exactly what you talked about with Tim Scott, their perspective is everyone's reality.
Right.
I don't know, because I watched this pastor. He was a white guy, and I like his content. But then when he starts talking about race, he's like, I don't know anybody who's racist. I don't know anybody who does this. Nobody at my church does this. Nobody at my church does that. He said, but I'll tell you what did happen. When I was young, I was hanging out with my friend, and 3 black guys beat me up for no reason. Were they racist? And he was like, but you know what? I forgive them. And if I wouldn't even know who they were today if I saw them. And so the story that he was telling was that his only experience of racism was when these black kids beat him up. And so and other than that, he doesn't know anybody. He was like, but then he like contradicted himself. He was like, there might be some people out there, but they're not close to me.
Right. It's like in this far away is like, oh yeah, nobody really, does that. I like this this question that Brother Riley raised: to be redeemed, a value of worth has to be placed on you. Does this country place value upon you? And more importantly, do you value yourself and each other? And that's a great question. I think for sure I place value on myself and
right.
my brother. I can't say the same always for America as a whole, right? There's this like
America absolutely places value, but the value that America places on people is related to is directly correlated to its relation. Say what?
I would say to the economic status, like,
and that's exactly what I was going to say. Economics.
Yeah.
I mean, and if you look out through our American history, right? So this is the whole issue kind of with the 1619 Project. And I guess that's a good transition, right? So this whole thing about the 1619 Project. And I do encourage you to go to the, the New York Times?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Go to the New York Times, look at it for yourself, read it, and you probably won't disagree, right? Because what it's saying is it's not Marxist. It's not, so like that's a lot of propaganda. It's not communist. It's not socialist. It's a simple review of the facts. If we start to look at the country's history
Mm-hmm.
as a whole, then we will start to see people differently as a whole. And the point being is that in 1619, when the first 20 slaves were brought to this country and sold to the colonists for slave labor, that was a very important turning point for this country. Fact or fiction?
That was definitely a turning point. Yeah.
And so the question then comes to the people who are, I guess, speaking against it. Why, right? So our brother McConnell said that he thought, what is his quote? There are a lot of exotic points about what are the most important points in American history. And he says, and that he disagrees that 1619 was one of them.
Hmm.
So the interesting thing about Brother McConnell is he is also happy to let you know that his great grandfather
Mm-hmm.
was a Confederate veteran. So like, let that sink in.
He's proud
Confederate veteran. And I was like, is there such a thing? Right? Because that we wouldn't talk about I guess like Nazi Germany. We wouldn't call like some of those soldiers that fought on the side of the Nazis as veterans. We wouldn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It was a foreign country who we fought a war against. This foreign group. The Confederacy was a foreign group. It just happened to be on American soil, but they absolutely declared themselves their own country. That was the whole point of the Confederacy, right? We want our own. We don't want to do with you. And so he is telling us that he is proud that his great grandfather was a Confederate veteran. And again, I don't purport to know or understand people's hearts. Oftentimes we can only know what people show us. But I absolutely believe that when people show you who they are, you better believe it.
Yeah, when you start bringing up, oh, this is our past.
So he values one past, but he doesn't value.
Right, exactly. You acknowledge the Confederates, but don't acknowledge that they were fighting in support, at the very least, of a very inhumane system. And it brings Frank brings up an interesting point. The founders of the SDA religion were initially cool with God coming back while their slaves in communities and segregation in full effect. Our religion.
Yeah, you gotta say that one. That's the whole. We're gonna get to that one too.
But related to that though is oh, you want to get to it later? My bad.
Yeah, I want to get to that later. So
okay.
Put a pin in that one because I think all of this kind of goes back to what we talked about initially.
Yeah, I mean, it all flows together because even the 1619 Project, the same people who are against it are also against the critical race theory.
Yes.
And there is so much misinformation about critical race theory. Like, it gave me a headache trying to find out like what exactly it is, because the first hits that actually pop up are all the people against it.
Yep. The first like 20 hits.
Yeah. And so you end up when you look it up online, you're like, okay, this doesn't seem right. This doesn't seem right. And it's like, well, who's actually the proponent behind it and what was their intent?
It's actually old.
Right. It's coming from the 70s. It's like, I didn't even know that. And I was like, it took a while to get to that point where like, okay, this is the root of it. And the Prager University has like over 100 hits on like what is critical race theory. And even without knowing it fully, when you watch the video, you're like, no, this isn't right. This is very propagandish and very over the top.
Yep.
But what I grasped from critical race theory was just the kind of, again, talking about the what needs to continue to happen now.
Yep. And
basically it's the request to continue to improve the situation, where the situation being our racist, the original sin, right? Of racism and slavery. Yeah, we ended that. We gave,
we're done with that, son.
We did. And the push, though, is that we shouldn't stop. Like, everyone's mind from the 1960s, everything got okay. Right? That's a lot of people's naive mind. It's like, oh, Martin Luther King, we did all that. It's done. We solved it. And it's like, nah, like, there's redlining, there's education disparities, there's all these other things that, have been going on. And the critical race theory basically is teaching, like, there needs to be continual progression forward and to not just stop. That's what I grasp. I don't know if you.
Well, yeah, I got the same thing. I actually started reading the book. I started looking into it. I picked up a book, found out it was just like an ebook that somebody was trying to capitalize on the moment. And so I finally got a copy of the original book, and it's really interesting, right? So one of the things, probably like within the first couple pages, you notice is that they're asking like these really interesting questions about how we look at things. And one of the things they ask is, is critical race theory a good or bad thing?
Mhm.
And like so it's a theory, right? First of all, it is not. It is a means for which to, and theories are used to help us understand reality, right? The theory of relativity, the theory of gravity, right? There are these things that happen in our world, in our life, in the universe, and when we try to figure them out and look for answers, we use scientific data, we use scientific facts and empirical evidence to say, here is the theory that we believe supports why A is preceded or by B.
Mhm.
And so, it's this really interesting thing, but it talks about, one of the things it talks about is, it's either you see race as this systemic thing, or you see race as a social construction. And if race is a social construction, that means it was created. That also means that if it was created, it can be deconstructed and we can create it into something new. And something that looks like something that values everyone. Who is going to argue with that? That's the one thing, right?
Right.
The other thing is, it talks about it said if you look at like the civil rights movement,
Mhm.
some of the people, and this was like a think tank that came together, lawyers, educators, all kind of people. They kind of argued that the civil rights movement, it did some things, but it was incremental in its steps. And currently, what we see is this system trying to incrementally kind of take away from it, right? And so they were saying that what you see is, you see these changes in society only based on the need that comes from the dominant caste. So, point of reference, the Civil War.
Mhm.
The Civil War, America was losing. Like, that's a documented fact. They weren't doing so well. They thought that they were going to lose.
Which war? Sorry,
The Civil War.
you said America. though.
America, no, yeah. So the
Saying, like,
Union.
because we're fighting.
Well,
Is
yeah, I'm talking about like the Union versus the Confederacy, right?
sorry.
So
Sorry.
so
That's America, like which side?
right, yeah. So the Union was losing. They weren't doing so well, and then they included these black soldiers.
Mhm.
They win the war, emancipation. So it was almost like, well, what if they would have won without the help of black people? Would we have seen emancipation? Because,
I think so.
and I mean, again, it's not to say like,
That was
there's
still a
not a,
catalyst, right? Because even
yeah,
before the Civil War, they had the Union's intention through legislation was to end slavery. The South was just like, nah. And so like that the Civil War like helped to definitively end it, right? Because before that you had the Emancipation Proclamation, which didn't do dilly squat. And even with Juneteenth, right, the celebration, that was like the last like physical location that slavery was still existing, even though it had supposedly been ended on paper, right? So I think the Civil War, sorry, definitely put a definitive end. But I think
right.
it's actually a interesting component that blacks were able to fight for their freedom.
But they had to. I mean, I guess my point is not to say that it didn't do that. Like, it absolutely did that thing. The question is, because they had to fight and make the argument to include black people in the army. Had they lost that argument, right? So this obviously conceptual. Had they lost that argument, what would have happened in the South, right? The Union would have, like you said, the Union was like, "No, we not doing that." we not doing it. And the Confederacy was kind of like, all right, well, we're going to do it. You're not going to take it from us.
Right. I mean,
Right.
a big reason why they broke off, and this whole sovereignty of states. People again like to, that's what really the Civil War is about. It wasn't about slavery.
Yeah. And then the other thing is like, even like the civil rights movement itself, it didn't necessarily gain the steam that it did until it started hitting pockets.
Oh, for sure. I mean, economics.
Like
the Montgomery bus riot. I mean, that was a big deal because our protest, I should say, and boycott was because they were able to for a long time not use the bus system.
Yep.
And yeah, that's how you get people to listen. And part of the game of America is like you said, economics. And if you have economic impact, people will listen to you. If you have money that in and of itself helps to gain power and influence. So collectively, that's why collective economics, shout out to Kwanzaa, is another important aspect within our community. And
here's the part in the book that I was talking about where it says they argue, or one of the persons from wrote in the Harvard Law Review argued that civil rights advances for blacks always seem to coincide with the changing economic conditions of the self-interested white elites. Sympathy, mercy, and evolving standards of social decency and conscience didn't really amount to anything. And so, so he was saying essentially just that, right? So it was really like the economics that drove the dominant caste system to move these things forward. Like, we can't do this no more. You messing stuff up for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, people think that we have such high morale, but it's not. There are people, and I think that's part of the nature of sin in and of itself, right? Just on the individual level, there are things that you do that are wrong and are wrong, but there are also things that you do that are good that are good. And I say within the construct of America, there were true Christians who were against slavery, but then there were also people who claimed to be Christians and people who weren't Christians at all that were pro slavery, and even in the civil rights era, pro discrimination. And it wasn't until it was something that impacted them, like economics, that they began to care. And it's interesting that I think it gets overlooked. Like, I think the information is there. And that was one of my takeaways in general with the critical race theory and with the 1619. A lot of this information is there, but the problem, the way that the general education system sometimes grazes over it, right? Because
or revises it.
The Montgomery bus boycotts, like that, I definitely remember learning that in school, and of course from my dad too. But in school, that was a thing, but it wasn't necessarily harped on and preached on. Like, oh, this economic item is what was it put catalyst to change things. But it's there, it's within it, and it's just like pulling out that information to raise it. And I think it makes people uncomfortable to hear that, oh, these people during these times weren't so moral, that they were like, you're right, we shouldn't have segregation. It was like, no.
Well, I know in some high schools, because again, high schools can dictate what their history books say, right? School systems, education systems. The state is actually the governing body of what goes into history books.
Yeah, they set curriculum, like they have suggested like books, and it gets reviewed, and they say yes.
And so I know one of the most recent ones from I think one of our southern states which was pretty controversial, was that they mentioned slavery as essentially like people who work the land. So they remove the word slavery.
Yeah,
and so
it's interesting that we do that here, because like in Germany, you can't deny the Holocaust. Like, it's again, like, if you like, that is a serious problem, like for anyone to be like, oh, the Holocaust wasn't real. Like,
you can't do that here.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, oh, but slavery, maybe it wasn't.
It wasn't so bad. It wasn't so bad. Which brings us to this other politician who was telling us, oh wait, I didn't mean to pop that up. This guy who I forget where he's from. I think it's down south too.
Well,
the South.
Different understanding sometimes.
Discussion on whatever the case may be on slavery, then you can talk about everything dealing with slavery, the good, the bad, the ugly,
There's no good to slavery though.
And so we keep having it, bro. Like it keeps happening. Like this is what interested me about a lot of this stuff. They call what like the 1619 Project, and they call critical race theory revisionist history. When it's just like you said, right? All they're doing is including all the information. And so the 1619 Project is essentially what they have issue with really is when you say, when was the country founded? Right? They want to lift up George Washington and 1776 and say like America was founded 1776. That's when America was founded. 1619 Project saying that a lot of, and one of my professors used to say this too, is that slavery, the system of slavery has influenced this country across many aspects, and especially our economics. It simply doesn't work for Black people now the same way it didn't work for Black people then.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a shame to try to change that aspect, and it's shocking that people want to somehow sugarcoat it into something that it's not. And we're gonna leave the link to it so you can excuse me.
Pleasure.
Not COVID. So you can sneak. So you can read the link, read the information on your own time, and come to your own conclusion from the source. That's one thing that we like to promote: is read the source, then form your own opinion, and then you'll be able to understand it. And speaking of that, there's been a lot of questions about what is then the Christian view, right? We've seen it in the comments. Frank rose a couple of questions. And it's interesting. I was actually looking at the Journal of Adventist Theology, and there's actually a really good article that talks about the early church during kind of the Civil War and pre-Civil War era, kind of post the Great Disappointment in 1844, leading up to the events of the Civil War. And what is interesting was to see the kind of change, because I think we talked about before on the show, like in 1844, people are like, yeah, Jesus is coming back. And it's like, meanwhile, there's like slaves like in chain. And they're like, man, Jesus didn't come back. That's so odd.
Yeah. I wonder what's going on. Is he late?
But this paper by Trevor Oreggio, one of the professors in the seminary, he talks about kind of like this transition in thought, like during the Second Great Awakening, you had Joseph Bates, and you had Uriah Smith, and J.N. Andrews, and James White, all the other church founders who basically dug deeper into Scripture. And as things were changing, as they noticed that Jesus didn't come back, what's going on? What's the world look like? They kind of looked at it differently. And what was interesting was that they actually, and I'm going to show an excerpt, they actually showed how slavery was a representation of America having dragon-like behavior. Like you can see it right there, where this is Uriah Smith, one of our great authors, who points and says, like, no, slavery is actually the reason why America fulfills the prophecy of being a lamb that speaks like that looks like a lamb but speaks as a dragon. I was like, oh snap! Like
dragon. Wow. Like, yeah, I like this lamb-like profession. Early acts of the government, Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, dragon-like behavior, slavery, religious intolerance, corruption, and oppression.
Right. And it's, I don't think this type of, again, kind of along the lines of critical race theory, like there isn't this digging up these things that our early founders were talking about and pointing out. And, you know, he goes on to say that, you know, basically he predicts that slavery would live on. This is for although slavery died in the battlefield, so where its spirit lived in an oppressed and sharecropping system that blacks were subjected to. And he actually had talked about that slavery would continue on post the war. And it's not just him. Like I said, it's James White, it's Jay Andrews. It's a lot of these people who kind of post the Great Disappointment dug in right into the word and was like looking like, wait a minute, no, like we can't go on talking about Jesus coming back when there's this big old elephant in the room of slavery. And so I'll share the link to this in the bio. It's really good. It's 24 pages, but it's all just straight, just like knowledge on the early Christian church. Because what I also didn't know, early Adventist church, was there's a Ellen White actually said people who were pro-slavery should be disfellowshipped.
Oh,
I forget where it is in here, but she mentions it. And
could you imagine? Because
right here, she counseled to remove their membership if they promote it in pro-slavery views.
And that's true too. What this, so is, you know, we're constantly pointing at other countries as being the beast, and this country is the most influential of all the other countries.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's an acknowledgement of, I think, even within the church to show that, you know, that this country wasn't all just roses, right? And that there was definitely a problem with slavery that was identified by the church. But I think the tying in again critical race theory, the action that's still required by the church is still needed, because even post like kind of our original founders speaking out on it, there was still the allowance of segregation within the church. There was still the allowance of separate conferences. There was still the allowance of church separate hospitals for blacks and whites. And they had the big turning point where the lady died when Washington Adventist Hospital refused to, you know, treat her. So it's a similar, I think, call to action for the church, is that, yeah, we had maybe this original thought in mind, but over the years, for whatever the reasons, you know, we've changed it. And even some of the founders who allowed, you know, segregation to occur in the church, you know, they were wrong. And it's really a request to not only acknowledge that they were wrong, but what are we doing today to be more inclusive, to be more diverse and understand. And there's this Adventist, I forget her name, I gotta find it, but she's Indian, and she talks about like her experience in America. She's second generation American Adventist, and I think maybe one of her parents might be whiter, but one of the questions she would get is, what are you? And she was like, personally, that's not something to ask somebody, like,
what are you?
And it's just interesting, like the language that people use that they don't understand isn't always as inclusive. What are you? Where are you from? But not in the proper way of, oh, where are you from around here? Or where, you know, it's like, where are you from? Because they see you and they're like, oh, you from Africa, right? You from Africa? You black? You from the Congo? I know countries in Africa. And it's like, nah, man, like, from Detroit. Like, what are you talking about?
Which is interesting, because I remember, you know, one of the other institutions of this country that is an interesting melting pot is the Army. So when I was in the Army, there was this guy from Dominica, from the Dominican Republic. Mm-hmm. And I remember, like, I was just messing around one day, and I said something in Spanish, and he was like, oh, and he started speaking in Spanish. Right. And I was like, oh, no, man. He's like, oh, I thought you were. And so it's like, for him, when you look at these other countries like Brazil, Mexico, you know, these other countries, when you look at people, like, It don't matter kind of black, white. They're just kind of like, oh, you from Cuba? You from here? Right? Because they're like their color shades don't dictate kind of their representation. And that kind of goes back to, like, again, the critical race theory of race being the social construction. He, me saying whatever I said in Spanish at the time, or immediately he was just like, oh, you're also like me, and therefore, okay. It wasn't like, oh, you're a black dude. He was like, oh, you Dominican? Like, it was just that, like, you're Dominican.
Well,
and so,
I think because in different parts of the world, nationalism is different, right? Like, whereas here there was this idea of the melting pot, which we changed from because people realize, like, oh, you're melting away people's backgrounds and cultures. It's like, well, yes, but no. But the the intention of it is that, and the intention of it is the acknowledgement, right? Like, it's okay to say I'm black and I'm proud. It's okay to say I'm from Italy and I'm proud. But people don't always see that. Like, no, we're America. This is America, and this is what American looks like. And it's like, yeah, it's okay to celebrate the things that are unique to America, jazz and apple pie and all those wonderful things. But you shouldn't disregard someone's cultural background. And it's interesting within the church. There's this that kind of happens to a level. What I mean is, like, just from the simplest point of, this is how you're supposed to worship. This is what worship looks like. And people don't realize, like, when they go to church and the conference to conference, it looks different, especially even global, not even thinking about globally, right? It's
you must have saw that post from Lecrae.
Yeah. Well, I did see his post, but I wasn't actually referring to, but yeah, it's like church.
It's like, I ain't churchy, right? And people took offense to that.
Of course they did.
Right. And people took offense to it and was like, he was like, and he had to define it, right? When I say I'm not churchy, I mean, I don't like to have to dress up. I don't like to have to, he was like, I don't like those old songs. I don't like some of the doctrine. I don't like this politics in church. He was like, do I fellowship with people with like believers? Absolutely. But I think, I think as a whole, the church is definitely kind of at a point where it's a turning point happening.
Yeah, and to Brother Alex' point, that is true. There is colorism.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. I definitely agree. And going back to maybe Frank's comment, is it our job as Christians to fight and eliminate racism, or is it strive to live our lives without prejudice and resistance?
My answer is yes.
Ooh.
Yes. Right. Yes. And I'm saying yes because through living our lives this way, you will then be able to fight those things, right? It's not to say that, and I think everything ain't for everybody, right? You might find it that, your way of dealing with it is by living a life that's pleasing to Christ and not discriminating and not taking on racism and prejudice. But by doing so, other people see your example and then their hearts are changed, right? Or you might be the person that says, like, no, I need to speak up for these people who can't speak up for themselves. And so the answer, is yes to both of them from my perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's reflective of even the Adventist history, where you had Adventist abolitionists who were very vocal, as we saw with, like, Uriah Smith. He's one of the most deep and profound authors, right, of the Revelation, Daniel and the Revelation, one of our great, books. But he was also profound and spoke out against, slavery, during his time. And his point, and a lot of the early founders' point, was this is all pointing to the fact that things are getting worse. Like, the slavery and the discrimination, they were pointing like, this is why Jesus has to come back. Like, we're putting people in chains. You can't do that. So it's an interesting thing. And we have another question by Brother Frank. If racism is sin, we can't eliminate it until Jesus returns, isn't it an exercise in futility to try to eliminate this sin? I don't think it's futile to do that, and the reason is it's like any other sin to be like we shouldn't
Exactly.
fight against pornography, we shouldn't fight against stealing, we shouldn't promote these things within the church. We just be like
Right.
people are gonna
Let
say,
your kids do what they want to do. Why do they need to honor their father and mother? They're gonna sin anyways.
right. So but we speak out against it because we're trying to teach people this is not the way. This is not what God has called us to do. This is not the thing that makes racism so interesting, right? Is that it's existed for a long time and is one of the great ways that Satan has divided not just the church, but just the whole world, right? Like
Right.
he's honed in on it, this divisive nature and ways that we try to look down from every major almost major time period within the biblical history. You see it, right? You see the Egyptians against the children of Israel. Then you see like the Babylonians against like the nation of Israel, and then all the way to Jesus and the Romans.
Israel against the Canaanites, and
Right, and it's this constant
even now Israel versus the Palestinians.
Palestinians. Yeah, it's this constant thing that's been going on for millennium at this point, just like every other sin too, for that matter. And I believe that it's our call to of course live a life as much as possible that's not in line with that sinful nature,
Yeah.
and to promote it and teach it to others. So.
Yeah, I think it becomes a definite issue for, and again, I think whatever it is that God puts on your heart to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
I definitely try my best to kind of live by the merits, and it's kind of like a motto for me, like in Isaiah, to seek to do good and I mean to do good and seek justice for the oppressed. I think that was something that Jesus did. I think people often forget that where they were during his time was a time of oppression. And he didn't necessarily have to, like what his protest looks like is definitely different than what our protest looks like today, but it absolutely was a protest.
Mm-hmm.
And again, whatever God puts on your heart to do, then you should do that. Especially if it's to do good and to seek justice for somebody else. I think what we as Christians should not do is discourage other people from doing the good that has been pressed on them. And I do think that happens sometimes. It's kind of like, and not to say that Brother Frank is doing that, but that's like a slippery slope where people's like, well, should we be doing this as Christians? That's not part of our responsibility. And then you start talking about social justice, and it's like that's not the ministry. That kind of stuff is liberalism, and and again, it's like, what? Like, all I wanted to do is do good for other people, and if that good means again speaking up for people who can't speak for themselves. And who can't speak for themselves? People like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, because they dead. They can't speak for themselves.
Yeah, I think there's elements there. Like you said, there's elements to it, and I think, of course, you can go like maybe what Frank's saying. You can go to one extreme where you become so extremist, right, that you're losing focus on the main mission, which is the gospel. But I think the gospel encompasses in support of standing against those things that are not in line with God. And clearly racism is, one of those things. How you decide to act on it, looks in different ways. I mean, you have Jesus, in different occasions, the Phoenician woman, the Samaritan, he's breaking these boundaries. The story of the Good Samaritan, right? He's breaking these boundaries of racism to show, although he didn't outright go to Caesar and say, free the Jews, and don't, and didn't tell the Israelites or the Jews at the time that, stop being, necessarily mean directly to the Samaritans, but he did it through his parables, he did it through his actions. And I think we can model after that at the very least. And how you
Absolutely.
further is, up to you, whether that's, voting in support of legislation that's anti-racist, or actually, being a diversity leader within your job to show, like, we shouldn't be, to teach others, in your workplace, you shouldn't be racist. So
Right. And I think the other thing too is just that the critical race theory is actually, some of it is very hopeful, right? Because one of the tenets is that race is a social construct that was created to do this bad thing. But as a society, as a group, if we educate people, then guess what? We can deconstruct this thing and move towards something a little bit better, right? And I think that's kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It was like there's this revision, this idea that people are revising history, and it's like, no, what people are saying is that racism is bad. It's a social construct. We can make change for that benefits everyone.
Mhm.
And what you get on the other side is, well, if you're going to teach about racism, you need to teach the good, bad, and the ugly about it.
There is no good about it, and I think while we know the world isn't necessarily going to get better, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't we shouldn't do our part to make it good
Right.
within the lives of other people. Jesus clearly made the world better, but it could, of course, get continually worse despite his efforts. And I think
What's that scripture? You might know it better than I do. For to was it for him to do good and do it not, that is sin?
yeah, and I think there's definitely biblical support of doing what we're called to do as Christians. Of course, preach the gospel, and of course, make people's lives better, right? Help the widows, right? That's what Jesus read from the scroll in Isaiah. So I think it's a very interesting discussion that we're still having 2,000 years later on what good looks like. And it is difficult because the world isn't getting better, and it's like, on one hand you're just like, man, will Jesus come back so we can leave this terribleness? But just like maybe the people during the disappointment, it's like we're very critical of them, but at the same time they were just maybe like, yo, just get me out of this place. Like, I'm trying to go to heaven, and we figure out some calculation that says you may come today, so let's get it. Like,
But I think that's a very interesting point that you bring up too. It's kind of like, if we in retrospect can look back at 1844 and be like, did y'all really think Jesus was coming for you then? Like, apply that concept to now for people who are like, Jesus coming soon, Jesus coming soon. People like, no, I don't do this because I know in the next 5-10 years Jesus is gonna be back, so I'm good. It's like, take a look at where you are in life, like what you're doing. Take a look at what's happening around you in society, and then go, Jesus coming back for us right now.
right, what are we doing to share the gospel? What are we doing to? There's so much work to do, man. It is so much work.
And it's really about that, right? It's about sharing the gospel. Like, and I think that's the context for me, at least for 1844, is like, did they give the gospel to everyone? Because that's the kind of catalyst thing, right? Like, once everyone's, like, the way I read it, my own interpretation, is kind of like, once everyone's given an opportunity to receive the gospel, that's when it's like, all right, everything kind of kicks off. And so now, during this world, our present day, like, are we doing our part to share the gospel? So that will hasten his coming, not like all this other stuff, because the world's gonna be what the world's gonna be. And so, right. I mean, I agree with this too. It's like, it's not gonna get any better. But the part that hastens his return is not all the sin that takes place, because sin has been here. It's us spreading the gospel.
Yeah, man.
It's like that loading. It's like loading.
Yeah. Do your part. Share the gospel.
Absolutely.
Share the gospel.
However God presses on your heart to do. If that means you protest, then protest. If that means you feed the hungry, feed the hungry. If that means that you don't do nothing, I don't know about that. But
I don't know about that. I think there's a parable about not doing nothing. But I if that means giving tracts out, when's the last time you've seen someone give a tract? I don't even know the last time I've seen a tract, to be honest.
No, I haven't seen it either.
It's such
Actually, yeah.
it's such a interesting trajectory. Like tracks are like the thing back in the day. Like everybody had them. Like he's keeping good Adventists. I'll say he's keeping them in their pocket. You're like,
Hey, actually, you know what? I take that back. I saw one in the bathroom at work.
oh yeah.
Like a couple months ago. I was like, hey, look at that. And it said like end times on the top, but on the front. It was like one of them little joints.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, hey.
But it's interesting just to see how we as a church are trying to progress. And yeah, I like that scripture, Frank. Submit yourselves to God, resist the devil, and he will flee. Resist. So we want to leave the conversation with you. What are your thoughts on it?
Absolutely.
What are you doing to combat racism, to share the gospel? What are your thoughts on critical race theory? We want to hear from you, of course, in the comments. We left some links in the comment section of where to find the paper that we referenced.
Check it out.
The 1619 Project, if you want to understand more about that. And there's a whole host of, good quote, good men do nothing. There's a whole host of information that we've been sharing. We definitely encourage you to go back, rewatch it, get some laughs in, get some knowledge in.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good. Yeah, I want to take this conversation offline. I dare you to read this stuff and come talk to me about it. I dare you.
Yeah, man, definitely hit us up. We love to hear from you. And that's all I got, Z.
That's it. I mean, I think that's it. It's just like I think it's good to kind of leave the thought there. The other story want to share just on a high note. We had a girls lacrosse team in Detroit who man, through adversity, they're gonna make a movie about this.
They probably are.
They're gonna make a movie about it. It just only makes sense that they're gonna make a movie of it. So like they had this team. This is national news, by the way. Actually, the Guardian, it's a world news organization. So this team, they in 2019, I think the boys team got started in Detroit at Cass Tech. So shout out to anybody who went to Cass Tech. I have some Cass Tech buddies. So this team, they have been working on. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. They have been working on just building up a team. 2019, they protested the school to get it started. They couldn't get it started, and then they finally got it started in March 2020. And y'all know what happened in March 2020.
Yeah, a little thing called COVID.
They started practice, and then the next week the school was shut down. And so they just started back. The team is about 90% Black. And these girls, they lost 6 games. And then their first win happened against Avondale High School from Auburn Hills, Michigan. And these girls, they finally won their first game, and it made news because through adversity, through they got started with $10,000. So the school basically told them, like, you want a team, start it yourself, and they did. And they've been, and so this is just a story of kind of like tragedy. Some of them were hit with COVID. Their families was hit with COVID. Practice was just kind of all over the place. And so their first game this year happened 1 week after their first practice.
That's crazy.
And they haven't even been able to work together as a team, but they came together for this, and it worked out in the sense that like it's just good to see them like still trying. And Cass Tech, man, is a big deal.
It is. It's definitely a staple in the community. I didn't even know to that extent until just talking to people, locally and understanding the history behind it. So yeah, it's definitely a good story, an inspiring story, I think as well. And I'm pretty sure you're right. It's gonna be a movie.
They're gonna make a movie. So look out for the Ava DuVernay.
There you go.
About Detroit lacrosse, and so hopefully it take a look at the story, and it will definitely bring a smile to your face.
There you go. And if you can't bring a smile to your face, then keep a face on your smile. There you go.
Absolutely. That's what we need more of that. Need more of that. So, with that being said, that's the end of the show.
That's it. Thank y'all for coming through. Hopefully, we've given y'all some reasons to not fear the bad news.
Right. Keep your mind and heart and mind.
There you go.
Focus on the Lord.
And always trust in God. We are two Christian brothers, and we out. Thanks for watching. Peace.